Philosophers talk to our time. Philosophers talk to our times, shattering the prism. Foucault in Discipline and Punish is, of course, totally right. About schools, I mean. I spent 25 years teaching maths in various different ways. Once or twice in classrooms, but I'm far too dyspraxic to be allowed loose in a classroom. So usually private maths tuition. And one of my recurring issues was, what the fudge are we teaching kids, and why are we teaching it, and why do we teach it the way we did? And in the end, it was impossible to not think that Foucault was right. The reason we teach 13-year-olds quadratic equations is not because realistically, at some point in their lives, they're going to need quadratic equations. They're not really going to be building catapults to defeat crusaders, which is one of its historic uses. Or at least I think it was. I might have made that up. I used to make up lots of stories about the history of maths because it made it much more exciting. Anyway, they're not going to need to do that. So why are we teaching it to them? For most of them, it's a dark art. They couldn't care two blind whatever's about the parabola and the glory of going up and coming down. None of that. Why would they care? And what was always annoying for me was there was a whole lot of really quite useful maths I'd have really loved to have taught 14-year-olds that would allow them to navigate their world. I mean, all that stuff I whiffle on about from time to time about the student T curve and how to tell real data from false data. We could teach it to 13-year-olds. They'd never forget it. It would open up their minds to the idea of how they are duped constantly. But we weren't allowed to teach that. Oh no. We taught what had been taught to Isaac Newton and Michael Gove. And heaven help anyone who said otherwise. And we taught it often in the worst possible way imaginable. And why? Well, it wasn't about education. Not really. Well, at least it wasn't about having an educated population. I always thought, you see, Foucault was absolutely right. It was about inculcating individuals with a certain sort of discipline and a knowledge that if they don't have it, then they are going to fail in certain ways. It was about creating then careers for individuals. I can't do quadratic equations, me. A world opens up before me. So that everybody understood exactly where they were within a disciplinary system. A system where they were used to having to expose themselves to the eye of the teacher. Where they were used to having to fit in to a certain disciplined environment. And if and when they didn't, they knew there would always be there would eventually be consequences that would hit them hard. I mean, they would cock up their GCSEs and their A-levels, and that would matter. Their parents might think it would matter, and it would certainly matter about what they could then do. It created then environments where kids were being sculpted into our society, being used to monitored, getting used to having to fit into a certain set, a rhythm, an order, and understanding themselves, even if they were rebels, they were rebels against a system that wasn't worth existing, let alone rebelling against. And so that rebellion was almost, I think I would say it was castrated by making you rebel against a school who was all cardboard and veneer. And I'll have certainly said about before, having gone to a public school, I went to the kind of school that educated me to pass the exam. And actually that is one of the things that has happened increasingly as education systems have got obsessed about kids just passing exams. You can teach kids to pass exams, which is not the same as I'm teaching them to understand. And one of the points I always felt about the British education system was it made the class system look like a caste system. So that Cambridge, in my day, was absolutely full of people. Now, they weren't only from Eton, but they were an awful lot from major public schools, so Eton, Winchester, etc. And they had been educated in very small classes to pass the exam. And that made them look naturally clever. The system was designed then to eulogize a certain class who could buy a certain privilege of education that would fit very well in this unpractical, unuseful exam that didn't teach them anything worthwhile about the real world and was no more relevant than Latin construe. You will notice I loathed the maths syllabus. I always thought myself as a little bit of the anarchist in the system, because most schools will hierarch by behaviour as much as by ability. And if you are very badly behaved, it is often very hard to do very well in mathematics. Maths is a disciplined subject. You need quiet and you need to think about it. You need a certain rhythm. And the disruptive folk will disrupt that rhythm. And so it was a way of rewarding those who behave themselves and ensuring that they got the best paid jobs as much as anything else. And all that jazz. And why was I a little anarchist in the system? Oh, because I actually taught maths. Maths as a system can be understood. Although it does help to be able to silently concentrate for an hour, there is another side to it that if you actually understand it, you can go quicker, go sideways, do all kinds of other things with it. So I used to do other things that weren't done in class. That would allow kids to really understand what was actually happening in the bloody maths. That would allow them to bypass the necessity for blind discipline. A bit. Not much, hugely, and I'm praising myself to the skies. I had very many failures. And many kids with ADHD who couldn't nail to the chair long enough to get them to understand. But sometimes you could. Just sometimes, because sometimes their ability to understand was greater than their desire to disrupt. So what's this got to do with anything? And what's it got to do with rebellion? Well, now I have been out of education now. I was in it for 25 years. And in those 25 years, kids didn't change much. There is this thing that teachers will say, there's an internal severity about kids. Every generation will look at the one that follows them and say, oh, they don't know nothing, them. They're going to ruin their teachers, them. But kids don't really change. And certainly over 25 years, not much changed. Kids, just kids. And yet, the internet is awash with millennials being rude about Gen Z and Gen A, whatever they are, saying these are finally the kids that will break the teacher. And I don't know. The teachers I know, the actual teachers I know, don't really think this is true. Okay? However, it is true that the role of teaching in discipline is on the shift. And that by itself will certainly produce something of this idea of this generation that is somehow unpicking the very notion of schools. And that's going to really matter to us. First of all, let me confess, as I said, I haven't got the ethnography. I don't trust the figures on the internet lambasting the educational standards of them that were coming up, them that were breaking teachers' backs, refusing to learn to read, passing degrees without being able to write their essays. I believe it is a plausibility. Certainly, if I was still teaching in university, I would make all kids write one essay on using ChatGPT or whatever they wanted to do. They set the question and reviewed the information. And then I would do another one in class. And if the one they didn't do in class wasn't better than the one they got the AI to write, I would fail them. Pure and simple. Because if they're not better than the AI, they don't deserve to pass. Which might be a little bit draconian, but it would force people to think. And within my subjects, things like philosophy, is crap anyway, so it doesn't really matter. You can use it as a knowledge gazer. You can't use it as a theory generator, because it will just simply tell you what everybody else on average has thought, which will get you at best a 2-2. Anyway, I'm off topic here. I just get very annoyed about the way that it gets presented that AI is going to gut education with a bit of information. It doesn't. But what it does do is shift the need for education, the way we have understood it. Why? Because what we need for a society, the way we need to discipline population, is clearly on the shift. It's clearly on the shift. It isn't as it once was. It was the case when I started that education, as I said, was one of the main ways you disciplined a certain part of your population. You trained them into where they were going to be in society. Now, in a world... Sorry, there's a mild dog confrontation beside me, in case you wondered what's happening. My dog is being attacked by my neighbour's dog. It's play, but sometimes I will need to intervene because my dog gets savaged. She's the big one. Anyway, so with all of that, what of course AI is going to do, and does do, is it sits and watches those that are using it. It trains them in different ways. It's shifted what it means to train and to monitor the population. Where before we needed knowledge to do it, we needed the people to self-identify within a system of knowledge so that they knew exactly what their place was and what would follow from it. We don't need that anymore, do we? We don't need it at all. We can monitor them all the time. The gaze is always on them, whether they like it or not. So it is no longer a case that kids need to learn things to learn where they are in society. Oh no, it's the phone that learns things about them. And then by learning things about them, controls what they do. The notion of discipline is clearly on the shift. Now, the dog fight started, so I didn't actually manage to do my caveats. My caveats here are simple. First of all, I haven't taught since 2018 in classrooms. I have taught online, but that's slightly different because people find you. And it is true that the last set of kids I taught, which would have ended about 2022, it ended a little bit precipitantly. And that was because these were kids who had been brought up in COVID and weren't really wanting to do very good, rigorous thinking. They'd missed a bit of their education, they said. And so when I was challenging them from different directions, which is what Maths A-level would invariably do, they weren't happy. So I lost them, and that was when I gave up. So that's why I have some credence to this idea that the role of education is on the shift. But I don't really know. And it is also true, you have to bear in mind that throughout my teaching career, it has always been said that kids are getting worse. I never remember a year that wasn't said. I always wonder about this genius year that existed, God knows when, 1920, 1940, perhaps my year, 1989. 1989? Why did I say 1989? I left school in 1987. Perhaps we were the genius year, but we weren't. And so I'm always very suspicious of that trope. But I do think something is shifting, because logically it is. Logically, the position of education in defining discipline is on the move. And that's going to really matter to how we understand society and who controls it and how it is formulated. Because if if the way the society is constructed doesn't need education in order to get people to incarcerate their position within it, then we've lost one of the ways we have traditionally formed our society, and we're forming it in a way that we do not yet understand. It is a way that is shifting. The level of effect of the breakdown of the necessity of discipline, I think, can't be easily exaggerated. So living in a world where people will be expecting to use AI to, if not do the exam, at least do a lot of the work, do the disciplined bit of the work, shifts what discipline is, at a time when we don't need it to be monitoring people. Now, the modern mind was created by relationships of discipline and punish, that created it within, that formed it, fashioned it, moulded it into a certain set of societies. But to shift it is to shift society. And I, for one, am deeply troubled by that. I guess I would have been one of those Luddites who was deeply troubled by the original creation of a disciplined society. I think I probably would. I'd have been longing for the old days, perhaps. I certainly am one of the Luddites who suspect that the movement to any other sort of society, a maximum vision society, where you don't need discipline, you don't need to inculcate discipline, You just need people to believe and to read and to use the bloody programs. It's one that is truly troubling. And the answer is, yes, regrettably easy to not use the blinking thing so much. It is true. I mean, we have AI turned off on all our search engines. Why? Oh, we were very good at searching for things. It is true that the search algorithms have become crap, and you have to become really flipping good to find things and use memory. But that is a useful skill in its own right. And at least the old system of discipline did teach you. Most kids will never use quadratic equations, but I have. Genuinely, I have. And one uses trig on all the time. But actually, I'd have that on my proper syllabus. So actually using the maths matters. Getting kids to teach maths that is genuinely useful to their lives matters. And if schools can't do it anymore, then I'm afraid it's going to be up to the rest of us, but also the teachers, to point out that fact and to point out what maths really needs to turn this possible disaster of the collapse of the need for education in its current form into a potentiality. Perhaps that means we can teach kids what they actually need to know to cope with the world they're going to live in, rather than the world that Isaac Newton or Michael Gove knew as kids, the world that that was teaching them into a certain role in society. It is potentially an opportunity, but one beset with an enormous risk.